Hi, I'm Andy Miocic. Welcome to another A News special on the UN General Assembly's session in New York. With me in the studio, as usual, is our very own Orhan Amashov. Orhan, thank you so much for joining me today. Now is the fourth day of the general debate, and the first speaker of the morning session is set to be Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We will cut to the address live as it begins and, of course, provide detailed analysis. But as we're waiting for the speech, many expect to be a defiant message against a Palestinian state. Maybe a brief overview of the events surrounding the war in Gaza would be in order. Israeli forces are engaged in a ground offensive in Gaza City. Health officials in the Strip continue reporting dozens of deaths each day. One important thing ahead of Netanyahu's visit to the U.S., Donald Trump has said he will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank, which is an idea floated by the far-right members of his cabinet. Trump added that there's been enough and that it's time to stop now. Of course, this follows the wave of recognitions of the state of Palestine by the UK, France, Belgium, and a host of other Western countries. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas gave a speech via video at the UN on Thursday, on the third day of the general debate, as he was not given a visa to join in person. He denounced the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel and said that the group will have no place in future governance of the Palestinian state, of which Gaza is an integral part. Now, as we are waiting for the morning session of the fourth day of the general debate to kick off, Orhan, what do you expect to hear from Netanyahu at the global stage?
I expect to hear absolutely wonderful, rhetorically very well substantiated, flamingly defiant speech. That's what I expect from Benjamin Netanyahu. Probably his speech will focus on four key subjects, amongst many other important subjects. One is Iran. He will describe Iran as an existential threat, not just to Israel, but to the region, to the world at large. A country like Iran, following on the footsteps of President Donald Trump, probably will be saying something along the lines that a country which has been exporting terrorism into the rest of the Middle East cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. That will be the key central linchpin of his commentary and reflections on Iran. About Gaza, he will pin the blame on Hamas, saying that the unilateral recognition of a conjectural state of Palestine will only be a reward for Hamas, and this is not the right thing to do at this juncture. I don't think that he will outrightly exclude the possibility of the creation of Palestinians at any point in the future, but he will say that that cannot happen at this very juncture. But fundamentally, Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers do not believe that they should be Palestinian state at any point. It doesn't really matter in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, because they logic based on the idea that Palestinians do already have their own state, which is the Kingdom of Jordan. They quite often reflect on the fact that in 1949, at the end of that war, during the inception of the State of Israel, West Bank was annexed by Jordan, not just occupied, but annexed, because Jordan was treating West Bank as part of Kingdom of Jordan, and that changed in 1967 after the Six-Day War. And they will be saying that the Palestinians do have their own state. West Bank is a territory where, according to international law, Israel is an occupying force, and Israel is doing its level best to ensure that there will be no chance for any Palestinian state to be created, maybe for some limited form of Palestinian bureaucracy there, led by a Palestinian Authority, but not a proper full-fledged state. As long as Gaza is concerned, the focus there is to put an end to the war, to human suffering. And we have heard this proposal, which is not a wild proposal, but a proposal about some sort of a transitional international governance led by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who is very privy to what is happening in the Middle East. He was part of the quartet before. That's an interesting moment. I don't necessarily think it will reflect on that, but that's part of the wider context.
What's interesting, that news broke. It was reported by the BBC, The Economist, many Israeli media, after Mahmoud Abbas's speech that was given via video address, where he said he is ready to work with Trump on a two-state peace plan. How long do you believe this has been in the making, this plan with Blair?
I think it must have been in the making, at least for the past few months, at least for the past few months when Trump was actively involved in bringing about this ceasefire deal involving the return of hostages and also post-Hamas Gaza plan, wherein some sort of international governance should be instituted there in order to enable later Palestinians to form some form of agency there, which may or may not lead to the creation of their Palestinian state. This must have been in the offing for some time. Tony Blair is not a spent force as such. He's a considerable figure, despite that legacy which is still there with him, which is still haunting him, the invasion of Iraq in 2003. In terms of international governance, finding flexible solutions, I think Tony Blair is indeed could be a very interesting option. But also, I'm given to understand, Andy, that it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu is about to begin his speech at UN General Assembly.
Let's see the pictures from the hall gallery, please. And as we are waiting for
while we're waiting, we can
address
continue our conversation.
itself, we can continue our conversation. As you've mentioned, Blair led his country into the Iraq invasion in 2003. Do you think such legacy can resonate with Arab leaders who are reportedly set to contribute to a multinational UN-backed force that will enter Gaza Strip after the war is over?
Yes, indeed, it could potentially resonate, because what we're dealing here is to find a practical solution which may work for the time being without being a conclusive solution. And that sort of international sort of peacekeeping, interim transitional governance, and it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu is about to begin his speech. We're receiving signals from New York City, and once he begins speaking, of course, we'll join our colleagues there, and we're just expecting to hear more. As we're waiting, they will start soon. That's what I know, Andy. But I think in the meantime, we're waiting. We can carry on our chat about Benjamin Netanyahu and the Gaza deal, and of course that may work, because as I said earlier, what we're looking for here, not a conclusive sort of a final solution, but an interim solution, which amongst many other things will put an end to human suffering now, quite frankly.
As we are seeing the delegations taking their place and the assembly hall filling up, there he is, Benjamin Netanyahu taking the
order
stand.
in the hall, and please be seated.
Yeah, he's at the rostrum, and let's have a listen to what he has to say. Very important historic speech, I would say.
Indeed,
Andy.
but there is a lot of movement in the assembly hall.
Yes, we see the rejection. Signs of rejection. It's all about putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. People are leaving their seats. It looks like they do not want. And it looks like that order we hear from.
Not a very warm welcome.
Not a warm welcome at all.
Stage for
but he begins. He begins now.
And let's cut live to Netanyahu's speech.
Languishing in the dungeons of Gaza. Ladies and gentlemen, last year, I stood at this podium and I showed this map. This map. It shows the curse of Iran's terror axis. This axis threatened the peace of the entire world. It threatened the stability of our region and the very existence of my country, Israel. Iran was rapidly developing a massive nuclear weapons program and a massive ballistic missile program. These were meant not only to destroy Israel, they were meant also to threaten the United States and blackmail nations everywhere. From Gaza, Yahya Sinwar dispatched waves of Hamas terrorists. They stormed into Israel on October 7th and committed acts of unspeakable savagery. From Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah had launched thousands of missiles and rockets at our cities, terrorizing our citizens. In Syria, the murderous dictator Assad hosted Iran's forces, tightening a noose of death around our throats. In Yemen, the Houthis launched ballistic missiles at Israel while choking global trade at the mouth of the Red Sea. So what's happened over the past year? We've hammered the Houthis, including yesterday. We crushed the bulk of Hamas's terror machine. We crippled Hezbollah, taking out most of its leaders and much of its weapons arsenal. You remember those beepers, the pagers? We paged Hezbollah. And believe me, they got the message. And thousands of terrorists dropped to the ground. We destroyed Assad's armaments in Syria. We deterred Iran's Shiite militias in Iraq. And most importantly, and above anything else that I could say to you or that we did in this past year, in this past decade, we devastated Iran's atomic weapons and ballistic missiles programs. So here's where things stand today. Half the Houthi leadership in Yemen, gone. Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, gone. Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, gone. The Assad regime in Syria, gone. Those militias in Iraq, well, they're still deterred. And their leaders, if they attack Israel, will also be gone. And for Iran's top military commanders and its top atomic bomb scientists, well, they're gone too. Israel's 12-day war with Iran, which I renamed Operation Rising Lion, that's from the Bible. This 12-day war will go down in the annals of military history. Our daring pilots neutralized Iran's missile defenses and took control of the skies over Tehran. And you saw this. Israeli fighter pilots and American B-2 pilots bombed Iran's nuclear enrichment sites. I want to thank President Trump for his bold and decisive action. President Trump and I promised to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, and we delivered on that promise. We removed an existential threat to Israel, and a mortal threat to the civilized world. We lifted a dark cloud that could have claimed millions and millions of lives. But, ladies and gentlemen, we must remain vigilant. We must remain absolutely clear-minded and vigilant. We must not allow Iran to rebuild its military nuclear capacities. Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium, these stockpiles must be eliminated. And tomorrow, UN Security Council sanctions on Iran must be snapped back. Thanks to the resolve of our people, the courage of our soldiers, and the bold decisions we took, Israel rebounded from its darkest day to deliver one of the most stunning military comebacks in history. But we're not done yet. The final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job. That is why we want to do so as fast as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, much of the world no longer remembers October 7th. but we remember. Israel remembers October 7th. On that day, well, I'll tell you, you can remember October 7th too. You see this large pin here? It's a QR code. What I ask you to do is hold up your phones, zoom in, and you too will see why we fight and why we must win. It's all in here. On October 7th, Hamas carried out the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. They slaughtered 1,200 innocent people, including over 40 Americans and foreign nationals from dozens of countries represented here. They beheaded men. They raped women. They burnt babies alive. They burnt babies alive in front of their parents. What monsters. And these monsters took more than 250 people hostage. And those included Holocaust survivors, grandmothers and their grandchildren. Who takes hostage grandmothers and grandchildren? Hamas does. So far, we've brought home 207 of these hostages, but 48 still remain in the dungeons of Gaza. 20 of them are alive, starved, tortured, deprived of any daylight, deprived of humanity. These are the names of the 20 living hostages. Matan Angrest, Gali and Zerv Berman, brothers, Elkanah Buchbot, Rom Braslavsky, Nimrod Cohen, Ariel and David Cunyo, another pair of brothers, Guy Gilboa Dalal, Eviatar David. You saw the picture of Eviatar David, emaciated, forced to dig his own grave. Maxim Herkin, Eitan Horn, Segev Kalfon, Bar Kupperstein, Omri Meran, Eitan Moore, Yosef Chaim Ochana, Alon Ohel, Avinatam Or, and Matan Tsengarker. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to do something I've never done before. I want to speak from this forum directly to those hostages through loudspeakers. I've surrounded Gaza with massive loudspeakers connected to this microphone in the hope that our dear hostages will hear my message. And I'll say it first in Hebrew and then in English. אחינו הגיבורים, מדבר ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו. אני פונה עליכם מעל בימת האו"ם. לא שכחנו אתכם, אפילו לא לשנייה. העם כולו איתכם, ואנחנו לא נשקוט ולא נרפה עד שנחזיר את כולכם הביתה, החיים והחללים כאחד. Our brave heroes. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to you live from the United Nations. We have not forgotten you, not even for a second. The people of Israel are with you. We will not falter and we will not rest until we bring all of you home. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to special efforts by Israeli intelligence, my words are now also being carried. They're streamed live to the cell phones of Gazans. So to the remaining Hamas leaders and to the jailers of our hostages, I now say, lay down your arms. Let my people go. Free the hostages, all of them, the whole 48. Free the hostages now. If you do, you will live. If you don't, Israel will hunt you down. Ladies and gentlemen, If Hamas agrees to our demands, the war could end right now. Gaza would be demilitarized, Israel would retain overriding security control, and a peaceful civilian authority would be established by Gazans and others committed to peace with Israel. And of course, you understand that the war in Gaza has affected every Israeli. But I'm sure there are people in New York or in London or in Melbourne and elsewhere who are probably thinking, what does all of this have to do with me? And the answer is everything. Because our enemies are your enemies. So let's do something else first at the UN. Let's do a pop quiz. And raise your hand if you know the answer. Here's the first question. Who shouts death to America? Is it A, Iran, B, Hamas, C, Hezbollah, D, the Houthis, or E, all of the above? All of the above. Correct, all of the above. Second question. Who has murdered Americans and Europeans in cold blood? Is it A, Al-Qaeda, B, Hamas, C, Hezbollah, D, Iran, or E, all of the above? All of the above. Correct. Again. So here's the point I wanted to make. Our enemies hate all of us with equal venom. They want to drag the modern world back to the past, to a dark age of violence, fanaticism, and terror. I think many of you are already feeling in your own societies the radical Islamist surge. You know, I'm sure you do, you know deep down that Israel is fighting your fight. So I want to tell you a secret. Behind closed doors, many of the leaders who publicly condemn us privately thank us. They tell me how much they value Israel's superb intelligence services that have prevented time and again terrorist attacks in their capitals, time and again saving countless lives. General George Keegan, former head of U.S. Air Force intelligence, once said, if the United States had to gather on its own the intelligence that Israel gives us, we would have to establish 5 CIAs. 5 CIAs. This past June, when Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities, German Chancellor Merz admitted the truth. He said, Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us. President Trump understands better than any other leader that Israel and America face a common threat. He showed the world that when Iran and its proxies murder Americans, take Americans hostage, shout death to America, burn American flags, and try to assassinate the President of the United States, not once, but twice. He showed them there is a price to pay for all that. But regrettably, many leaders who are represented in this hall, they send a very different message. Sure, in the days immediately following October 7th, many of them supported Israel. But that support quickly evaporated when Israel did what any self-respecting nation would do in the wake of such a savage attack. We fought back. Now just imagine, just sit back for a second and imagine an attack against America proportioned to the attack against Israel on October 7th. Imagine a regime, a terror regime, dispatching thousands of terrorists to invade the United States. They massacre 40,000 Americans. They take 10,000 Americans hostage. What do you think America would do? You think America would leave that regime standing? You don't think that. No way, not a chance. the United States would wipe out that terror regime and ensure that such savagery would never threaten America again. This is precisely what Israel is doing in Gaza. We're wiping out the terror regime of Hamas and ensuring that this savagery will never threaten Israel again. That's what we are doing. That's what any self-respecting government would do. Yet, and it's a yet that I'm sorry to say here, yet over time, many world leaders buckled. They buckled under the pressure of a biased media, radical Islamist constituencies, and anti-Semitic mobs. There's a familiar saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Well, for many countries here, when the going got tough, you caved. And here's the shameful result of that collapse. For much of the past 2 years, Israel has had to fight a seven-front war against barbarism with many of your nations opposing us. Astoundingly, as we fight the terrorists who murdered many of your citizens, you are fighting us. You condemn us, you embargo us, and you wage political and legal warfare, it's called lawfare, against us. I say to the representatives of those nations, this is not an indictment of Israel. It's an indictment of you. It's an indictment of weak-kneed leaders who appease evil rather than support a nation whose brave soldiers guard you from the barbarians at the gate. They're already penetrating your gates. When will you learn? You can't appease your way out of jihad, and you won't escape the Islamist storm by sacrificing Israel. To overcome that storm, you have to stand with Israel. But that's not what you're doing. As the prophets of Israel foretold in the Bible, you've turned good into evil and evil into good. Now I want to drill down on this. Take the false charge of genocide. Israel is accused of deliberately targeting civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposite is true. The head of urban warfare studies, Colonel John Spencer, he's perhaps the world's greatest expert on urban warfare. And he says, Israel is applying more measures to minimize civilian casualties than any military in history. And because we're doing that, the ratio of non-combatant to combatant casualties is less than 2-to-1 in Gaza. That's an astoundingly low ratio, lower than NATO's wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, especially when you consider that Gaza is one of the most densely populated urban areas on Earth. It has hundreds of miles of terror tunnels underground, and it has countless terror towers above ground, and thousands of terrorists embedded in the tunnels and in these towers in civilian areas. If you want to see what measures Israel takes to avoid civilian casualties in this war, just look at what we're doing now in Gaza City, the last Hamas stronghold, one of the two last strongholds. For 3 weeks, Israel dropped millions of leaflets, sent millions of text messages, and made countless phone calls urging civilians to leave Gaza City before our military moves in. At the same time, Hamas implants itself in mosques, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, and tries to force those civilians not to leave, to stay in harm's way. And it often threatens them at gunpoint if they try to do so. For Israel, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy. Hamas uses civilians as human shields and as props in its sick propaganda war in Israel, against Israel, a propaganda war that the Western media buys hook, line, and sinker. Now, despite Hamas's threats, close to 700,000 Gazans, almost 750,000, have already heeded our calls and moved to safe zones. Now I want to ask you a simple question, a simple, logical question. Would a country committing genocide plead with the civilian population it is supposedly targeting to get out of harm's way? Would we tell them, get out, if we want to commit genocide? We're trying to get them out. And Hamas is trying to keep them in. And this charge is so baseless. The comparison to genocide, wholesale slaughter of populations. What, did the Nazis ask the Jews to leave, kindly leave, go out? Did others, you want me to name all the genocidal leaders of history? Just go one by one. Did anyone do this? Did they say, get out so we can come in? Of course not. So the truth has been turned on its head. Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization whose charter calls for the murder of all Jews on the planet. This genocidal organization is given a pass. It's barely mentioned. While Israel, which does everything it can to get civilians out of harm's way, Israel is put in the dock. What a joke. You want to hear another one? Israel is accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza when Israel is deliberately feeding the people of Gaza. Since the beginning of the war, Israel has let into Gaza more than 2 million tons of food and aid. That's 1 ton of aid for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. Nearly 3,000 calories per person per day. Some starvation policy. If there are Gazans who don't have enough food, it's because Hamas is stealing it. Hamas steals it, hoards it, and sells it at exorbitant prices to fight its war machine. Last month, even the UN, not exactly a supporter of Israel. You're supposed to laugh, by the way. Last month, even the UN admitted that Hamas and other armed groups looted 85% of the trucks. That's why you have deprivation. Those who peddled the blood libels of genocide and starvation against Israel are no better than those who peddled blood libels against the Jews in the Middle Ages when they falsely accused us of poisoning wells, spreading plague, and using the blood of children to bake Passover matzahs. Anti-Semitism dies hard. In fact, it doesn't die at all. It just keeps coming back with its libelous lies, refurbished, regurgitated over and over again. And I want to tell you something else. These anti-Semitic lies, they have consequences. In recent months, Jews have been assaulted in Canada, Austria, or rather Australia, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and elsewhere. Here in America, an elderly Holocaust survivor was burned to death in Colorado. And a beautiful young couple from the Israeli embassy in Washington was brutally gunned down right in front of the Holocaust Museum there. Thankfully, President Trump's administration is forcefully fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism, and every government here should follow its lead. But instead, many do the opposite. They actually reward the worst anti-Semites on earth. This week, the leaders of France, Britain, Australia, Canada, and other countries unconditionally recognized a Palestinian state. They did so after the horrors committed by Hamas on October 7th. Horrors praised on that day by nearly 90% of the Palestinian population. Now, let me say that again. Nearly 90% of Palestinians supported the attack on October 7th. It's not supported only, they celebrated it. They danced on the rooftops. They threw candies. That's both in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, as you call it. And it's just the way they celebrated another horror, 9/11. They danced on the rooftops. They cheered, they threw candy. You know what message the leaders who recognize the Palestinian state this week sent to the Palestinians? It's a very clear message. Murdering Jews pays off. Well, I have a message for these leaders. When the most savage terrorists on earth are effusively praising your decision, you didn't do something right. You did something wrong, horribly wrong. Your disgraceful decision will encourage terrorism against Jews and against innocent people everywhere. It will be a mark of shame on all of you. But wait a minute, Mr. Prime Minister, they tell me. Wait a minute. We believe in a two-state solution where the Jewish state of Israel will live side by side in peace with the Palestinian state. There's only one problem with that. The Palestinians, they don't believe in this solution. They never have. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a Palestinian state instead of Israel. And that's why every time they were offered a Palestinian state, but were required to end the conflict with Israel and recognize the Jewish state, every time, over the decades, they turned it down. And that is why every time they were given territory, they used it to attack us. In fact, they effectively had a Palestinian state in Gaza. So what did they do with that state? Peace? Coexistence? No. They attacked us time and time again. Totally unprovoked. They fired rockets into our cities. They murdered our children. They turned Gaza into a terror base from which they committed the October 7th massacre. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The persistent Palestinian rejection of a Jewish state in any boundary is what has driven this conflict for over a century. It is still driving it. It's not the absence of a Palestinian state. It's the presence and existence of a Jewish state. And I find it amazing, that the foreign chancelleries and the ministries and all those who pontificate about this, and the leaders, how can they not see this basic truth when it is repeated again and again and again ad nauseum? And I want to say something else. This rejection of a Jewish state not only applies to Hamas, it also applies to the so-called moderate Palestinian Authority. You should know that the Palestinian authorities pays terrorists to slay Jews. The more Jews the terrorists slay, the more the Palestinian Authority pays. The Palestinian Authority names its government buildings, its public squares, its schools, after the mass murderers of Jews, which they glorify as martyrs. They pay and glorify not just the killer of Jews, but also killers of Christians. Christians like Taylor Force, an American veteran who was brutally murdered in Israel by Palestinian terrorists. But, that I hear from the Western leaders. They tell me, the PA promised us it will reform. And I know this time, Prime Minister, it will be different. Yeah, right. We've heard these promises for decades. They always promise. They never deliver. Because you see, the Palestinian Authority is corrupt to the core. They haven't held elections in 20 years. They use the same textbooks as Hamas, exactly the same textbooks. They teach their children to hate Jews and destroy the Jewish state. And Christians don't fare much better. When Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, was under Israeli control, 80% of its residents were Christians. But since the PA took control, that number has dwindled to under 20%. These are the people you want to give a state to? What you're doing is giving the ultimate reward to intolerant fanatics who perpetrated and supported the October 7th massacre. Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it. So here's another message to those Western leaders. Israel will not allow you to shove a terror state down our throats. We will not commit national suicide because you don't have the guts to face down a hostile media and anti-Semitic mobs demanding Israel's blood. And I want you to grasp something else, which is also distorted in the media. I say this not only in my name or the name of my government, but on behalf of all the people of Israel. Last year, there was a vote in the Knesset, our parliament, whether or not to oppose the imposition of a Palestinian state. You want to guess what the results were? Out of 120 members of our parliament, 99 voted against and only 9 supported. That's over 90%. It's not a fringe group. It's not the prime minister who himself is extreme or he's held hostage by extreme parties to his right. It's over 90% of Israelis. My opposition to a Palestinian state is not simply my policies or my government's policy. It's the policy of the state and people of the state of Israel. Western leaders may have buckled under the pressure. And I guarantee you one thing, Israel won't. Israel's victories over the Iranian... Thank you, I know you won't too, that's good. Israel's victories over the Iranian terror axis have opened up possibilities for peace that were unthinkable 2 years ago. Take Syria. For decades, the very idea of peace between Israel and Syria seemed unimaginable. Well, no more. Today, we have begun serious negotiations with the new Syrian government. I believe an agreement can be reached that respects Syria's sovereignty and protects both Israeli security and the security of the minorities in the region, including the Druze minority. From the founding of Israel, Jews and Druze have been brothers in arms. We have fought together, we've bled together, we built our lives together. When I was a young commander in Israel's Special Forces, my own life was saved by the invaluable advice given to me by a great friend, Salim Shufi, a heroic Druze IDF veteran. And that's why I couldn't sit idly by, nor could Israel sit idly by, while the Druze were being slaughtered by jihadists. And I instructed our forces to stop the massacre, which they promptly did. Peace between Israel and Lebanon is possible as well. I call on the Lebanese government to also begin direct negotiations with Israel. I commend it for its declared aim to disarm Hezbollah. But we need more than words. If Lebanon takes genuine and sustained action to disarm Hezbollah, I'm sure we can achieve a sustainable peace. Of course, until that happens, we will take whatever action we need to defend ourselves and to maintain the conditions of the ceasefire which was established in Lebanon. Our goal is not merely to monitor Hezbollah's actions, but to prevent them from violating the ceasefire and attacking us at any time. But I'm sure that if the Lebanese government persists in its goal of disarming Hezbollah, peace will come very speedily and very readily. Victory over Hezbollah has made peace possible with our two Arab neighbors in the north. Victory over Hamas will make peace possible with nations throughout the Arab and Muslim world. Our victory would lead to a dramatic extension and expansion of the historic Abraham Accords, which President Trump brokered between Arab leaders and myself 5 years ago. And I took note, as I'm sure you did too, of the encouraging words spoken here by the President of Indonesia. This is the country with the largest Muslim population of all nations. And it's also a sign of what could come. Forward-looking Arabs and Muslim leaders know that cooperating with Israel will provide them with groundbreaking Israeli technologies, including in medicine and science, in agriculture and water, in defense and AI, and so many other fields. I believe that in the coming years, the Middle East will look dramatically different. Many of those who wage war on Israel today will be gone tomorrow. Brave peacemakers will take their place. And nowhere will this be more true than in Iran. The long-suffering Iranian people will regain their freedom. They will make Iran great again. And our two ancient peoples, the people of Israel and the people of Iran, will restore a friendship that will benefit the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, the horrors that happened on one dark day, October 7th, those horrors happened countless times during the centuries of my people's exiles among the nations. Jewish blood was cheap. Jews were killed with impunity. We had to beg others to defend us. The rise of Israel did not mean that the attempts to destroy us would end. It meant that we could fight back against those attempts. And that is exactly what Israel has done since October 7th. Our sons and daughters fought like lions. Our brave soldiers donned their uniforms and rushed into battle. They were armed with the dreams of the 100 generations of Jews who came before them. The dream of living as a free people in the land of Israel, our beloved homeland for more than 3,000 years. The dreams of living in our own independent state. The dream of having an army to defend ourselves. And the dream of being a light unto the nations, a beacon of progress, ingenuity, innovation, for the benefit of all humanity. On October 7th, the enemies of Israel tried to extinguish that light. 2 years later, the resolve of Israel and the strength of Israel burned brighter than ever. With God's help, that strength and that resolve would lead us to a speedy victory and to a brilliant future of prosperity and peace. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Well, Orhan, there sure is a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, 40-minute delivery and full of extraordinary claims. Undoubtedly of rhetorical flourish.
Let's start with the scene itself. We've seen at the beginning of the address a commotion in the hall, delegations leaving during the speech. There were claps from the Israeli and U.S. delegations.
I don't know the exact figure, but it looked like 2/3 of the audience was empty. Actually, seats were empty. It shows to what extent Israel may find itself isolated on the global stage. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resolve and that defiance, flamingly defiant speech of his, reflects that Israel would be very much inclined to act like a super Sparta, driven by the sense of self-reliance and that economic self-sufficiency and diplomatic self-sufficiency. The big question is that you've noticed there's been massive focus on the United States, on the nature of that intricate, close, intimate relationship between US and Israel, and to what extent actually Israel will be able to walk alone if that US support is no longer to be taken for granted. I think that some of our predictions have proven to be the case. Iran
Indeed,
was key.
You did predict
Iran was a key focus as an existential threat. Hamas as a threat to the peace in the region. absolute inadmissibility of the recognition, unilateral recognition of a conjectural Palestinian state. But my feeling is that Benjamin Netanyahu is against the creation of Palestinians under all circumstances, because he seems to be fully convinced that even if Israel says yes to Palestinian state, Palestinians themselves will say no to a Jewish state. And he made a couple of extraordinary claims. We need to look into whether those figures really match the reality. He said that 90% of Palestinians, presuming by Palestinians he meant those living in the West Bank and Gaza, supported 7th of October attacks by Hamas. That's an extraordinary claim. That shows the extent to which he believes that the admission, the acceptance of a Jewish state by Palestinians is not something that is going to happen. And number two claim that I noticed, he said that 90% of Israeli population supports his cabinet and his vision of the Gaza policy, and also his view that it is not time to recognize Palestinian state. But when I say it's not time to recognize Palestinian state, it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu believes that Palestinian state should not be created under any circumstance in the future, because Palestinians quite clearly are not capable of living in peace with the state of Israel. That seems to be his conviction.
Let's go to Tel Aviv, where Oli Goldberg, Middle East affairs expert, is waiting for us. What did you make of this speech? We've heard a lot of references to the U.S., Netanyahu comparing October 7th to the 9/11, asking what would America do. He called Hamas to lay down its arms, and also distributed speakers all across Gaza Strip to speak to the hostages directly. What do you make of this speech?
I have about 20 years of experience living under Netanyahu as prime minister. And I don't think I've ever heard such a densely packed collection of lies in a single speech that this man has made in either Israel or any kind of international forum. He told one truth, and that is that the great majority of Israelis, I don't know, 90%, I think that's a made-up number, just like in the case of the Palestinians. But when he said that the great majority of Israeli Jews support his policies, I think in that he was truthful. He lied about everything else, by the way, including historical detail in a particularly shameful way. For example, just as an anecdote, because I was listening to the speech, when he said that the Nazis did not ask Jews to leave Germany before they exterminated them, he lied. You know, it doesn't even matter what the point of the story is. The point is that he brazenly stands up at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly and lies his way through a 40-minute speech. There was barely a single truthful word uttered by this man throughout his speech. So I don't think there's, I heard you say, both say that there's a lot to unpack. I don't know if there's that much to unpack. This is Israel at the moment. Israel is all in. It has committed every resource it has towards the promotion of the strategy outlined by this man, which basically amounts to Israel can do whatever it wants to whomever it wants for as long as it wants, wherever it wants, without paying any sort of price. That includes thinly veiled threats leveled at both Syria and Lebanon, despite spinning them as potential talks about peace. We know that even talks with the Syrian leadership collapsed. We know that Lebanon is promoting things at its own pace. Israel had absolutely nothing to do with stopping the infighting in Syria between Druze and the regime's forces. It's just incredible, but it is the situation right now. Israel is detached from reality. And when you heard Prime Minister Netanyahu receiving enthusiastic applause, that was the sound of the Israeli delegation. All of them people close to Netanyahu, brought there especially to applaud and to whoop it up. Netanyahu is known for his oratorical skills. I have to say I've never heard him as childish and as juvenile as I have today. I would assume that was directed at President Trump with quips like, "Let's make Iran great again." But I have to say the entire thing wasn't just deceitful, it reeked of despair. Israel has absolutely nothing to lose anymore because it has no international standing whatsoever.
I would like to ask you one thing now that you mentioned that Israel is becoming increasingly isolated. in the world, its
I
staunchest
can't hear you
ally,
very well.
the United States is still not showing any major signs of denying support to Israel, but we did hear US President Donald Trump saying yesterday that he will not allow the annexation of the West Bank. Do you see Trump maybe losing patience with the Israeli Prime Minister and his policies?
I did not hear the question, but I did not hear it perfectly, but I can assume that you asked about President Trump's statement or
On the
reported
West Bank,
statement that he
yeah.
would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. I think to add my 2 cents to the never-ending analysis of Donald Trump, I think Trump divides the world into winners and losers. And I think that for some time he really thought of Netanyahu as a winner, doing it all, bucking against international pressure, doing his own thing and not caring about what anybody else says, which is kind of a Trump fantasy. I think Trump is looking at Israel now and at Netanyahu now, and he's seeing the loser. This is not a cause Trump has any reason to back, especially when Trump is being constantly pressured, not just by Europe and potential adversaries like China and India, but by his good friends in the Persian Gulf, by Saudi Arabia, by the United Arab Emirates. All of this is happening in real time. I don't think Trump intends to let Netanyahu get away with the audacious plan to act as the global rogue state that he outlined in the last minutes of his speech. Netanyahu can't do anything that he said Israel would do.
Ori,
Israel
thank you so
cannot
much
do this
for
alone.
joining
The
us.
Israeli
Unfortunately,
economy is
our time is running out. Thank you so much for providing us with your insight and opinions.
sure. Thank you.
Orhan, we do
Bye-bye.
have just a little bit of time left.
little bit,
Would you
a
like
couple of
to
minutes, 1 minute
make
only.
a conclusion statement? Would you
Yeah,
like
let
to
me make
evaluate this speech?
Yeah, allow me to make concluding statement, 1 minute statement probably. That would be something that we can allow ourselves at this juncture. Fantastic speech. I think rhetorically he was really good, but Ori believes that he was very juvenile. It wasn't his sort of a UN best, perhaps, but still I think Benjamin Netanyahu managed to sort of focus on those key linchpins. Fundamentally, the question remains, if US support is no longer to be assumed for granted, what will happen to Israel? I think Israel will plod on for some time as a super Sparta, but of course it is globally very, very isolated. And in today's session, in particular, that commotion at the beginning, with probably more than 50% of seats being empty, exemplifying its rejection of Israeli policy in Gaza and regarding two-state solution, indicates that Israel's life will not be very easy, but for the time being, they will be able to carry on with the self-same spirit. There does not seem to be that legally binding, forceful international consensus that is capable of putting that sort of pressure that would have some bearing upon Israel's actions, with a possible exception of that free trade deal element that we discussed before the program regarding EU. That may have some bearing. Some other elements may have some bearing. But ultimately, Netanyahu feels very emboldened despite that rejection of his policies at the UN.
Orhan, thank you so much
Thank you
for
very
your
much.
analysis. Spot on, as always.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for watching. That's all in this special coverage. But don't go anywhere. In just a few minutes, you can see the news on A News.